I'm Dr. Stephen Holt, and I have the privilege of chairing the Oversight Committee for the Northeast Housing Strategies. And tonight's meeting is a special meeting specifically to deal with one thing. So if you have your agenda, hopefully you grabbed one. If you did not grab one, let me encourage you to do so. They're right back at the table as you sign in. We are dealing with one specific issue, and that's the recommendation to increase the subsidy from $80,000 to $100,000. Our time will be spent in this discussion as we will have presenters from Portland Housing Bureau, and I don't know if others will participate in that, but the only discussion tonight will be on this topic. Now, I spend a little moment on that just to remind you that this is a meeting that's open to the public, however, not a public meeting. And what that simply means is if there are concerns you have about housing, affordable housing issues, the Oversight Committee, or any other things pertaining to that which we would oversee, we're interested in hearing from you, want your input, want your concern, but tonight is not that night. Tonight is the night to talk about, as there will be room for public comment, tonight is the night to talk about what's on the agenda. So welcome, thank you very much for being here, and I think we are ready to go. Andrea Matthias.
Good evening. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate you taking the additional time out of your busy schedules on an evening with bad weather to help the Housing Bureau kind of sort through this issue around the subsidies for homeownership.
And I am Dana Ingram, Housing Program Coordinator for the Bureau. So sitting here with Andrea to present the request, suggestion, whatever you want to call it, hoping for a decision tonight.
So this presentation, which you also received last week, is intended to present the Northeast Oversight Committee with information that supports the recommendation of the Portland Housing Bureau that homeownership subsidies in the interstate URA as part of the Northeast Neighborhood Housing Strategy be increased in order to adequately allow access to the benefits of homeownership for the people that are currently on the PHB preference policy list. The recommendation at this point is pretty specific. The Housing Bureau is recommending that the subsidy be increased from $80,000 per unit to $100,000 per unit for down payment assistance and up to $125,000 per unit for the development of new construction units based on the evaluation and verification of need as demonstrated in a review of financial documents associated with a new construction development project. For future preference policy rounds, the Housing Bureau is proposing the same level of increase, and we are proposing that in order to avoid what would be necessary to support a lower subsidy amount, which would mean prescribing higher incomes and lower levels of debt for households applying to future preference policy rounds. And then the last recommendation associated with this presentation is the suggestion that PHB should consider increasing citywide resources for homeownership so that low-income households, particularly those that have been displaced or are vulnerable of being displaced, can purchase homes in less expensive neighborhoods outside North and Northeast if they so desire. Does anybody have any questions at this point before we move forward?
Just one real quickly on your last point. If you could be just a little more specific when you say that. So what exactly are you saying?
Currently, the Housing Bureau has resources for homeownership down payment assistance in the interstate urban renewal area and in the Lentz urban renewal area, and a very small pot of citywide resources that would support probably 7 households in accessing homeownership. The Bureau at this point is suggesting that additional resources be identified citywide to increase the ability of households to have choice in where they purchase homes. So they're limited geographically to where they can purchase homes at this point.
And so to increase resource, you mean to expand where, or do you mean something else?
We mean to expand the type of dollars that the Bureau is using for homeownership down payment assistance. Currently, the Bureau has allocated tax increment financing in those two specific urban renewal areas and a very small pot of citywide flexible resources. So we're proposing a shift in resource allocation of existing resources or identifying new resources that would support that citywide flexibility. We wanted to start this evening by providing a little bit of kind of historical context for how we got to where we are today in making this request. So PHB homeownership financial assistance has been provided primarily in the form of down payment assistance loans to eligible home buyers. We've been providing it in this way for many, many years. It requires that home buyers be able to secure a private mortgage, so they have to meet a bank's lending requirements. And so wanting to show that the amount of subsidy it has taken to get households eligible to meet those requirements has increased over the past 5 years, from $40,000 to then $60,000 and now $80,000. Also wanting to kind of explain to folks how tax increment financing works for down payment assistance. We hear $80,000 of down payment assistance, and that sounds like a large chunk of change. And then we hear $100,000, and that sounds like an even bigger chunk of change. But the way that the TIF financing actually works, when provided as down payment assistance, it requires that 20% of that total award be provided for sticks and bricks or home repair improvements to make that down payment assistance an eligible use for that tax increment financing. So that $80,000 is really only $61,000 of down payment assistance. The rest of that is the fee to the community partner to support the home buyer through the education process, through the real estate transaction, finding the house, doing an inspection, all of those things. And then the other $16,000 goes to the required home improvement grant to make that eligible. And you can see how that breaks down for a DPAL award of $100,000 also. So when we talk about the total down payment assistance award, just wanting to be really clear with folks what that actually really means in terms of down payment assistance to a household receiving that award. That's also one of the additional restrictions and limitations of using TIF for homeownership assistance, in addition to the geographic limitations that I spoke of just a few minutes ago. In terms of the North-Northeast neighborhood housing strategy, $5 million was awarded to homeownership programming as a part of the larger $20 million that was awarded to the North-Northeast neighborhood housing strategy. When the outcomes for the program were defined in 2015, the number 65 households was identified as being able to be assisted with that $5 million. And that number of households was identified based on kind of historical outcomes of the program. And so at that time, in January 2015, we felt that that was an achievable goal. And so wanting to share a little bit about the 5 years of data that the Housing Bureau looked at when identifying 65 households as the achievable outcome. So the chart at the bottom left I'm not actually sure folks can see that, but so in 2010, 2011, the very first bar in that chart, the average MFI of households being assisted with down payment assistance was 56% of median family income. And then jumping all the way to the bar on the right, the AMI increased by 10% up to 65% AMI. So the pool of households likely remained the same, but the households who could actually afford to buy homes on the market with the down payment assistance that the Bureau was providing increased just out of necessity as the market increased. And you can see, looking at the chart on the right, the average purchase price per year for the 2010 to 2015 fiscal years. The average purchase price increased from $152,000 in 2010, which seems like a lovely number compared to where we are these days, to, in the far right-hand column, in 2014-15, that dollar amount is a little over $200,000, so a $50,000 increase in that 5-year period in the average sales price of folks that were buying homes with the down payment assistance. Should we stop there? Any questions, Julian, maybe?
Yes, I have a quick question. Are these down payment assistance specifically in the northeast area or citywide?
These numbers were pulled specifically from the interstate URA.
Thank you.
If you incorporated the Lents URA dollars and data, I think it would look very different, potentially. So now we're kind of jumping to some information that we are using to gauge the mortgage readiness and mortgage affordability of the households that are on the current preference policy list. So frequently when people talk about mortgage readiness, they talk about income and how much household income is required to afford a mortgage at a certain level. One of the things that we quickly realized when our community partners were working with the 42 households that are on the current preference policy list is the tremendous impact that debt has on the ability of these households to afford a mortgage of different levels. And so this chart is intended to convey that household incomes alone look like households, in theory, should be able to afford mortgages of a reasonable level, but when you factor in the debt, that number changes significantly. And this debt, the affordable mortgage amount with average debt amount, is the average debt of the 42 households that are currently on the preference policy list. So this is not kind of theoretical average household debt. This is the households that applied to the preference policy and are currently working with community partners. And so you can see for a household with an income of $50,000 with no debt, they can afford a mortgage of about $230,000. But once you factor in that debt, we're really looking at a much lower mortgage amount and a greater gap between what they can afford and most likely what's currently available on the market. So this next slide is a breakdown of the 42 households on the preference policy list currently and the mortgages, the estimated mortgage amounts that they can afford given both their income levels and their specific debt. And I want to throw out a bunch of caveats around this. These are estimated mortgage amounts as identified by the community partners that are working with these households currently. They are not intended to be a guarantee or a promise of mortgage affordability anytime in the future, but just provide a snapshot of where folks are today. So you can see that 12 households can only afford a mortgage of $140,000. And then, the next two bars over, you've got 7 households who can afford mortgages of $160,000 and 8 households who can afford mortgages of $180,000. The number of households who can afford mortgages that are more in line with what's on the market without any subsidy or assistance, you can see they're much lower in number. 2s, 3s, there's a 4 there for households. 4 households could afford a mortgage of $240,000. But these are the mortgage levels of the households that we're currently working with. So wanted to be able to provide this snapshot to people as you consider increasing the subsidy levels. Any questions about this information at all? So there's a lot of information in this next chart. So this is also a representation of all 42 households. It's the same, it's similar information to the slide that you just saw previously in terms of 12 households can afford a mortgage of $140,000, 7 can afford that mortgage of $140,000 or $160,000. And then we've attempted to add a visual of the gap between what we think is a reasonable down payment assisted home sale in the interstate urban renewal area, $290,000, and the average of 4 different development projects that are happening, would be happening and are queued up to be taking place with community partners in the urban renewal area. The average of those construction costs per unit is $350,000. So this slide attempts to show the gap between the affordable mortgage, which is the green part of the bar, the down payment assistance, that $77,000, which is associated with a subsidy increase for down payment assistance to $100,000, and then the gap for those various households in terms of their ability to use down payment assistance to buy a home on the private market, or to the gap that those community partners would need in terms of building new units. So one of the things that this slide shows, I think, pretty quickly is that for the households community partners are working with now, even with a subsidy increase, many of the households cannot access that for down payment assistance on the current private market. Also, this conveys that the gap for these households for newly constructed units is even more significant, which is why the Housing Bureau has proposed a subsidy increase of $125,000 per unit up to, instead of the previous $100,000, which was brought to the Oversight Committee. So for the development projects that are in the queue that are being reviewed in terms of their financial pro formas, those are all being brought to the table by Proud Ground, Habitat for Humanity, and PCRI. And all of those organizations are proposing to also bring to the table, in addition to the Housing Bureau subsidy, significant leveraged resources and other homeownership dollars to fill that gap in terms of what these households can afford between the affordable mortgage and that $350,000 average construction cost per unit. Questions on this slide at all?
So the increase for the construction is proposed to go from 80 to 125?
That's correct.
100 to 125?
No, so the Housing Bureau has not done homeownership development in recent years, and so the subsidy has been $80,000 for down payment assistance, but there hasn't really been a subsidy cap for the development of homeownership units. So this conversation would be kind of setting that precedent.
I guess my question is, what is it currently? What are we asking to change? We're asking it to go up to 125 from the current level of 80, correct?
So there hasn't been a cap on homeownership development subsidies because we haven't done homeownership development. It's all gone out the door since 2010, I think, as down payment assistance. So this is the first time that the Housing Bureau, as the Housing Bureau, has contemplated development of homeownership units. So there hasn't been a cap. We could adopt the down payment assistance cap of $80,000.
I guess my question is, what is it now? Like, what are the partners getting now that you're asking to set a level of 125, but I don't know what that's going
So
from?
Right. So partners brought applications to the table. For example, PCRI brought an application for $80,000. There were some other applications that came in also for $80,000 through that original $5 million allocation awarded to the African American Alliance for Homeownership Collaborative and There are a couple of other homeownership projects in the queue that have come in through different funding solicitations on the development side, and those are the dollar amounts that have been requested. There were no caps associated with those solicitations, and so we've kind of run into this disconnect.
Kind of.
Thank you. So basically, you're saying there was no funds earmarked for this, and you base what would be provided on what you heard back from the stakeholders in the field would be a adequate amount initially to subsidize ownership in a development project.
That's correct, and I think that many people were believed that the $80,000 for down payment assistance would be sufficient, a sufficient subsidy for development as well. Construction costs have increased, land costs in the URA have also increased.
With the adjustment to 100 and 125, what would be the projected number of individuals who would be assisted?
So the implication of that subsidy increase, thank you, Cupid, that's the next slide, is that if the Housing Bureau does not identify additional resources to support the subsidy increase, we will not be able to assist the initial proposal of 65 households in terms of home ownership. So the Housing Bureau is proposing that we honor that commitment of 65 households and identify additional resources from the TIF lift that Council approved for homeownership in the interstate URA in 2016. And so based on current projections, we think that that could result in anywhere from 35 to 50 fewer households accessing homeownership. It really just depends on how that all plays out in terms of development costs, acquisition costs, but that's the ballpark in terms of the number of fewer households.
Over what amount of time when you say the 35? I just want to be clear.
Over 5 years.
So you're saying that with the current amount allocated, even though there are 65 homes committed, that at 100 and 125, it would end up being 30?
No.
No?
So this chart here is a roadmap, a forecast of all of the homeownership resources that are committed, all of the interstate TIF resources committed to homeownership for the next 5 years. And so, you know, if you divide that 20 million by 80,000, you get 250 households. If you divide that 20 million by 100,000, you get 200 households. And so, you know, we don't believe that it's going to be quite that clean. We don't think that it will, you know, it has the potential to be 50 fewer households or 35 potentially.
Oh, fewer. Okay.
Fewer households served,
Okay.
right?
A clarifying question. So these are loans on top of a mortgage that people have to repay. Do you know if those who received them in the past, how is homeowner retention? If they're paying their mortgage and the subsidy back, are people able to keep up with both? Or do you know historically, have they been able to manage both? Is the subsidy really helping for access, we know, but is it also for retaining your home?
So the households who receive down payment assistance as a loan receive that as a no interest, no payment loan. So there are no payments on that amount of subsidy until they either sell the home or until 30 years. It's got the same period as a 30-year mortgage. So that's down payment assistance. For households who are in permanently affordable units, and so that's actually all of the development proposals that Proud Ground and Habitat are bringing to the table, they don't have to pay those loans back because the equity that they would receive when they sell is more limited. And so that unit is affordable for 99 years or more to future households.
And you haven't yet identified where the new money will come from
We are
to supplement?
We are proposing that for the full 5 years of interstate resources that are committed at this point, we're proposing that they are shifted, additional resources are shifted from the TIF lift, which is a different pot of tax increment financing, to honor the initial commitment to serve 65 households.
And do you know the impact of that, of shifting those funds from one to the other?
We do estimate that it will serve 50, potentially up to 50 fewer households in that 5-year period.
I have a question. The repayment after 30 years, is that a lump sum payment?
At this point, a household has a few options. They can refinance. Depending on their financial situation, they can change their loan to be a loan that has monthly payments, or they may have moved and sold the home in that time period.
My question is on this 30th year question where the down payment, if they were to hold on to the property and at the 30th year their mortgage is probably paid off, is the other subsidy, is that still have the contingency that if they sell at a later date, they still have to repay it, the down?
Those loans are not forgiven. They have been forgiven at various points in the past. They are not currently forgiven. At 30 years, the homeowner has to contact the Housing Bureau. We contact the homeowner, and they have to take one of several options.
And what options might that be?
So they either have to refinance the house and pay back the Housing Bureau, or they have to modify the loan into a loan that has monthly payments. And I don't know what those payments are off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a bigger conversation? We're throwing money at the problem, but the problem is really the cost of housing. So is this being proposed in context of the bigger issue? Or is somebody addressing the cost of housing? I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, I think I would invite our assistant director or our business operations manager to answer that question. Or someone from the mayor's office, perhaps.
Javier Mena at the Housing Bureau. Most definitely, the challenge that we have is, do we keep the current levels that we have committed to with this 65 households? And the challenge of helping these households actually achieve the dream of homeownership. And also with the other resources that have not been allocated, keeping the same levels and hoping that the market does not continue to go up and that we are able to help these potential home buyers into that. That's one option. We don't think that can happen because we see where the market is going. Therefore, we're saying we need to increase to address the bigger issue of the market. We need to increase the subsidies in order to help these 65 home buyers, understanding that there'll be less people that will be able to be assisted, but at least we can help them into homeownership. If we continue to delay, it'll get worse, based on as to where the market is going.
So there are two things that are in my mind. If we go back, well, let me just first of all say this. So my concern, and it's important that the entire Oversight Committee hear it, my concern number one is if we do an increased subsidy at 100,000 and up to 125, are we going to be having this conversation again in 2 years? We're going to be having this same conversation as it relates to trying to help people secure homes. So I want to think comprehensively, big picture, that we want to get dollars out the door, we want to get people into homes, and it doesn't make sense to do a circuitous effort. That just is not intelligent to me at all. So I'm trying to figure out how do we address that so that what we do with the dollars that are in hand can empower as many households as rapidly as we can. So that's part of my question.
So I would say that's exactly what we're trying to do. Being that these are the resources that we have now, we need to act now. And by increasing this and be able to allocate all of these resources now, then we can address at least the current available resources we can utilize. If there are subsequent resources for home ownership, then we will need to have further conversations because the market will have shifted.
So if we go back to the home affordability gap slide, as I'm counting, I see 29 of 42 homes that even with $100,000, we still have a gap.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's correct. And, at this point, I can't put those households into different kind of slots of homeownership type by partner and project. But though, generally speaking, those would be the households who would end up in a new construction development that's, proud ground, habitat, PCRI.
Can I also make a note that I would say about 7 people of that list are really close to mortgage readiness. And so the people at the 12 and 7, and I think that's 8, their mortgage readiness was a little bit further out. So when we talked about predicting, their situation can change, the market can change, and it is very hard to predict. But I can tell you that when we're looking at the larger side of the grid, those people are very close to mortgage readiness.
Sure, the ones on the other side, I got that.
Yeah.
But of those 29 homes that are still having the gap, how does that $100,000 help them?
So on the development projects, PHB has looked pretty closely at the financial pro formas associated with those, and PHB is not the only subsidy. If that was the case, $125,000 would not be adequate. So those partners on the development side are all bringing additional resources to the table. They're fundraising, they're grant writing.
And that was my second question around this, and you said that there is leverage, I like the term, that the partners are bringing to the table. I'd like to know what that leverage is. So help me understand if you can.
So I do think at the November Oversight Committee meeting, partners are bringing specific projects to talk about in more detail, but examples of that leverage would be Metro provides transit-oriented development, incentives that have been brought to the table. There's federal resources called SHOP funds that have also been identified. There's also state LIFT resources that will be coming online. I think in November or December that will be requested. There's the Federal Home Loan Bank of Des Moines that gets talked about a lot as a leveraged resource.
Go ahead.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around the repayment at end of 30 years. Just knowing what the market was like before and what happened with people's housing balloon payments, it's almost to me like setting folks up for failure. because you get this big lump sum of money, and let's say you have a mortgage that's a 72-year mortgage, then in addition to that, you got another 30-year mortgage that you got to pay at the end of 30 years. If somebody doesn't plan for that, something happens, they lose their job, or the economy goes the way it's gone in the past. So you're telling me in 30 years I could be moving out of my house and into a tent?
So I will say this. We have been managing, the Bureau has been managing mortgages, first home buyer mortgages, down payment assistance in combination with the Portland Development Commission, about 20 years. The Bureau has never foreclosed on any properties. Whenever there are issues with the home buyer, whether there is a income issue, whether there is a family issue, the last thing we want to do is foreclose, and we tend to work with those families to address whether in my vision is, let's say it's the 30 years is due, the family, it's elderly couple, they still want to stay in the house. We will verify that financially, in terms of their income, they qualify and that they need the subsidy, and we can extend the term for whatever length that is. And we've done that many times. We've modified loans on home buyers many, many times to ensure that they stay in the house and not displace them.
I'm actually going to ask Felicia what her thoughts are, because I know earlier in the year she had brought up some points in regards to some of this topic matter, and I personally respect that. So what do you think, Felicia?
I've read all the documents, and I understand why the partners are asking for the $100,000. My concern is not the subsidy. My concern is a part that Marlon is talking about, honestly, Cupid, is yes, the Bureau has in the past modified loans, but the modification on $40,000 or $30,000 is pretty easy to modify. My only concern is when you get to six figures, 100,000, 125,000, and this is nothing related to the partner's request. I want to really talk about this. This is a Bureau thing, is that's a whole different ballgame. I do, like Marlon, have concerns on that end, that a portion of it isn't forgivable. In a lot of jurisdictions, if you stay in the house for a certain amount of time, there is a forgivable component of the overall loan. I mean, I do one in Gresham. Right now, I administer Gresham's. Gresham's, after a certain period of time, is forgivable. And because I do agree with Marlon, I've been on the end where the person gets the balloon payment from PDC, and I can honestly say they're pissed, and they're really stunned, and they're shocked. And Dana, you can attest to this too, because she's witnessed it when she worked for us. People don't come right going, oh, yeah, I want to really, work with the city. Instead, they feel like they've been bamboozled. It's actually a PR nightmare from the city side and from the agency that has administered the original thing, Cupid. But I want to say this is totally separate than the amount of the subsidy. I mean, it's going to be hard without the subsidy, to fund in this area. But the bigger question that the Bureau has to ask itself is, you're asking people to, when you sign multiple loan documents, right? Whether it's a first and a second, people sign, but when you have a silent second loan, and this has been studied, a lot of people don't know they have it until it actually comes. Whether it's a home improvement loan that they've done with the government, whether it's a big silent, my concern is the actual amount. And then Marlon's like, yeah, in 30 years, if we're really helping these sort of low-income buyers, and a lot of us are not going to be around in 30 years. I do have concerns with that part, that it's not forgivable. I have more concerns about that than I do about the actual subsidy itself.
Just to respond to that a little bit, what I would say is that as a housing bureau, our job is to ensure and help residents and people get into housing, whether it's homeownership or rental. Our business line is not to displace because of a loan debt or anything like that. We do multiple, whether it's on rental or homeownership, adjustments on home buyers based on homebuyers' income, needs, and situations. We also have to be good stewards of public resources, and being able to recover this investment and be able to then turn around and be able and invest into some other household to be able to get into home ownership is important as well. So that's kind of why, in terms of the philosophy of being able to recover those resources is.
And Felicia, I'll just say, because I manage the loan servicing team, they do everything they can to make sure people stay in their houses. I mean, we get several, a month, and we do write some of them off if we have to, and we don't, because we don't want people to lose their homes. But if people have the ability to pay, then we try to figure out a way for them to do that that's not going to put them in harm's way of losing their house.
I have a comment. I don't know if this variable matters or not, but if a homeowner gets into the program and they have the assistance on the down payment, they have a mortgage, what happens in 30 years, which it will, they're going to need improvements and repairs. What happens to that family in that situation? Do you even, is this a concern?
So right now, when someone uses a PHB down payment assistance loan, they can access home repair resources 12 months later. And the reason for that 12-month period is that their down payment assistance loan also comes with home improvement dollars. But we do recognize that particularly in this neighborhood, in this market, the homes people are able to buy may need significant amounts of repairs. So I think that's one dynamic, but the other dynamic is that, we're excited to be trying homeownership development, because putting people in new construction units that are, high efficiency appliances that are, energy tight is something that we haven't done as the Housing Bureau. And, we're excited that they won't have to be concerned about making those repairs for a period of years at least.
We also know that a lot of the first-time home buyers need education in order to prepare for those unexpected needs, whether it's 5 years from now, 30 years from now, and we require that anybody that's going through the homeownership program have some education in terms of homeownership, either through the housing center or through some of the other partners. So that is a requirement.
I still have a concern where you can educate a person, but if you're presenting here a higher lift or down payment amount, and they're going to be struggling to kind of make those payments, how do they manage when they have other needs, such as the repairs that come up and they've used all the dollars that have been available to them and there's been no repayment?
Our loans do not require repayment. There's no payments associated with our loans. They are silent for 30 years. So in the 30 years is what we've been talking about, that the loan is due, and based on the situation, we may adjust or we may negotiate as to how that payment gets paid, how that loan gets paid. But it's a silent loan, so there are no payments for those 30 years.
And could you remind me, are the down payment assistance loans assumable by a family member? So if the owner dies or needs to move into care, can one of their children or a close family member assume that loan? Mm-hmm. Or is it come due?
They are assumable by an income eligible family member.
All right, I haven't heard from all of my committee. Want to hear from others? Dr. Bethel, do you have some thoughts, some questions? Sir.
I don't think any questions, maybe questions wrapped up in the thoughts. I'm still where Marlon is, and then I've been there for a while. It's wrestling with this whole idea of the repayment, particularly after the 30 years. Or you need me to talk a little bit more into that? Just quickly running through this, I took $100,000 and divided it by 120 months. That comes up to $833. That does not include interest, and I don't think any of us can project what interest is going to be like 30 years from now. It might be 30%. Who knows what it's going to be? But for a family who has taken this as a low-income family and got into housing and got some stability in housing, all of a sudden now is faced with a great balloon payment of adding this, and this is, 120 months. That's 10 years that they're getting. So they're spending 40 years paying on a 30-year note before they can ever be free and clear to say, I own this house. I would want to encourage the city to go back and do something, even if you have to have a combination that after living so many years, you will reduce this by a certain percentage. And at some place before you get to 30 years, you help that couple begin to adjust to making the payment so that by the time they get to the 30th year or the 35th year, they're done. But not 30 years and then say all of a sudden you've got to refinance, you've got to put another loan on this property. That's pure downright just usury of poor folk. And I just can't support that being that way. Not talking about, as Felicia said, the subsidy, that's another thing. But what is the impact on low-income persons once they sign into getting into this, and also making sure that they understand that what you're signing is not a 30-year lease, not a 30-year mortgage. You're signing up, when you take this and say, I'm going to take this home, you're signing up for at least a minimum of 40 years. A minimum of 40 years, because that's at least where you're going to be. And hopefully by that time, the $800 and some plus whatever it is will not exceed what their monthly payment has been over the 30-year span. So that's where my concerns, that's where my questions are, and hopefully we can do something to help people be able to bridge that and not get stuck on the back end. I don't like that word silent. Those silent contracts and silent things that are hiding in the fine print. Sometimes it makes me want to go in and sign papers and take a very small pen and write my own little fine print down the bottom that they can't read and see, and then sign it. And then when they come back and start something, I say, but did you read the fine print? What did the fine print say? I'm not going to pay you all of that money. That's what the fine print said. But I didn't read that. Yes, you did, because you signed it. I got you. And I don't want any of our folk who are trying to get a house to get hung up with fine print at the end, and it's just out there.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Tristan, we haven't heard from you.
My thoughts on this are somewhat in consensus with what's been discussed already. I look at the kind of the purpose behind it, and it says to address the market and the financial barriers, currently. And then I look at this affordability gap, and to your point previously, and increasing to the 100 and 125, and you still have the, I think you said 27 that really aren't, 29 that aren't there yet still. And I like the idea of, yes, let's work a little harder to get people into homes. Yes, of course. But on its face, that's all I'm really seeing. But in its effect, as we've heard from the discourse so far, there's so much more going on. And I feel like the question really isn't, should we increase it just to 100 and 125, or is that the numbers? I feel like the question is what's being asked now is the holistic approach. I mean, are they really going to be protected? Are we really putting people in homes to succeed, or are we just putting them in homes? And I want to say, yeah, this is great. Let's just move forward. But there's way too many more questions. And even the other point that was brought up is, yes, you're saying there's some level of leverage to kind of add to the affordability gap or to shorten the affordability gap, but there's still not necessarily definite in that as well. So I just feel like there's a lot more questions to be answered beyond than just, is it 100 and 125?
Thank you very much. Sheila, yes.
I just have a question. Perhaps I should even know the answer. But actuarially speaking, what is your expectation by adding the balloon, if you will, or the additional, the repayment of the 100K at the end of the 30-year? What was the rationale of how that was going to be most helpful to not only the longevity of the program, but the stability of the borrower?
So what I will say is, as we talked about, and it was regardless of the amount, whether it was 50,000 or 100,000, it was more about the program itself. So as we look at in making an investment into homeownership, and if it's through a down payment assistance and it's property gets sold, that property is no longer affordable because it's been sold into the market, then a way by which we can recover some of those resources and reinvest them for homeownership again, as opposed to where we're investing in through program or habitat where it's permanently affordable, then there is no concern, and that's why there's not a loan, because we know that the next house is also going to be affordable for that family that's able to buy. So that was the first concept. The second one is, as we look at families that are able to buy through this process, the hope is, it stabilizes their household, gets kids through school. 30 years from now, the hope, once again, is that they have established themselves and they are much better in a financial and stable economic situation, that then they can, again, repay and be able to reinvest those resources. I will reemphasize again that the last thing that the Bureau will do is force anybody into a 10-year amortized loan that says this is what you have to pay. We always look at what is the owner's ability to pay, and that includes whatever their private debt is and anything else that's going on in their lives before we start talking about do you have to repay on this loan or not. As Leslie mentioned, there are several times that the loan servicing department has looked at homeowners and has, if the loan was amortized, which we have several loans that are amortized through our different programs, that they have modified it and it's not amortized anymore. It's just a loan without payments, and it doesn't require repayment until 30 years or 40 years later, depending on the situation. So we, again, as a Bureau, our goal is not to displace anybody, is to ensure that they are stable in their households, and we will do whatever it takes to be able to do that.
So, as a follow-up question to that, so are you then explaining all of that to the borrower up front, or the home buyer?
So
up front, so that they are clear on that? And what would happen if that borrower has set it up for that property to go to their heirs and they die? What's the expectation of the heirs at that point?
So we do try to educate the buyer. The challenge, as Felicia mentioned, is that when you're buying a house, there's so many things that are happening that I don't remember when I bought my house exactly everything that was said. I would just wanted to sign the documents and get into my house. So it's difficult to really gauge how much they're tracking and information that's being provided. Maybe we can do a better job in subsequent years, once they have had the house, being able to send reminders that you do have this loan that's there and that it will be due in 30 years. Maybe that's something that we can implement in our systems. We don't have that right now. So that is, so that's kind of the challenge there. And I forgot your second question, or.
So if something happens to the original.
So for the heirs, if they qualify based on income, we have no problem saying, having them assume the loan, or depending on if their income is low within the program guidelines, then we can do another 30-year payment deferred type of loan. If they actually, based on their income, they can pay off the loan or they can make monthly payments, and that's something that we work with them.
So here is my personal issue with.
Turn those off, please.
Here's my personal issue with this, and I want a full disclosure. I pushed the Bureau that I think this should be a forgivable loan after a duration of time. So I want to put that on record. And here is the reason why it's so important to me, why I think this should be a forgivable loan, is we're trying to bring wealth back into the African American community, a portion of it. Why, if you give us a silent loan with no payments, because technically it's about $277 a month over 30 years, right? Historically, what does that do to our community? When you give us a silent loan, a six-figure silent loan, what happens to our community? We lose that property. So my issue with this, and I've told the Bureau this, is it has to have some sort of forgivable component, especially if we're going into six figures. It's very different when we've done these silent loans with some sort of appreciation component in the past. One is $25,000, even up to $60,000. But once you get to the levels that we're getting to, how do we build wealth back into the African American community when you say, okay, here's a $125,000 loan, a $100,000 loan? And as Marlon was just talking to me, what happens if that family member does die and they have a 19-year-old in medical school? They've lost the property. I mean, it's not like they can afford it. I don't have, again, an issue with the subsidy. I want to be really, really clear, but I don't feel like it benefits my community to give us over $100,000 silent loan. And no matter the way we educate it, whatever we do, financially, it's $277 a month that they have to budget, and how many of them are going to budget it at the end of the 30 years. I want to know how many of them will still have that property. So that's more of my concern, is that how do we give that, how is that a service to my community, giving them a six-figure, 30-year loan? And when we're talking about be good stewards of public money, the government has subsidized the white community for years in all sorts of ways. Why is it now, when it's something that benefits my community, it now has all of these barriers and parameters? Because these forgivable loan programs are throughout the country, staggered in every city from Boston to New York to Gresham, Oregon, down the street. So why all of a sudden in Portland is it like Hardstead, you will have to pay all 100% of it back in 30 years? That's just really my question.
Well, I'm going to ask us to defer. We do need to talk about that. I think it's a significant part of our concern. But I'm going to hold on that because I want to get your feedback specifically on the first part of our meeting tonight, and that's the subsidy. And I want to hear from every committee member regarding the request. So, and also, if that means you would like to hear from, we have some partners here. If you'd like to hear from the partners to say, partner, tell me, how does this help you? What does this do in terms of moving us forward? So I think we've got time for that. That's what we set this aside for, because ultimately I want to land the plane tonight. I want us to be able to make a recommendation that says this is what we as a committee are going to do regarding the subsidy. And this other issue, which is a policy issue, is something we certainly have to address. So I'm not shelving that. I'm saying, though, I really want to make sure that we nail down this subsidy discussion.
So the question that I keep asking with this increase in subsidy is, are we saying that this is not achievable at all without the increase in subsidy? How many additional people are helped when we increase the subsidy to 100 and 125? Because at the end of 5 years, there were going to be 50 fewer homeowners, and that's a significant number. So if there are other resources to bring to bear, $350 a door sounds spendy to me on construction costs. I would love to see the pro forma on that. But how many? Because according to the graph right here, increase that $17,000 increase helps 3 people. So that's 3 groups. No, that bar. If you break it down, right? Because all the one that's right at the line, that's 3.
Yes. That's true.
Yes. Right. So according to this graph, increasing to 100,000 helps 3 people.
Right.
That doesn't seem worth having 50 fewer home buyers at the end of 5 years. See what I'm saying? Like, something else has to come into play here because it's not, the numbers do not make sense to me.
So one thing that this graph does not convey is the additional development resources that are brought to bear. And so, either partners can come up tonight or we can dive into those pro formas in more detail at the November meeting. But the leverage is what is in that, kind of gray triangle that doesn't have blue or green on it at the top left corner of that graph. So I think that's one answer to your question. But when we talk about there being 50 fewer homeowners, if there's not a subsidy increase, what the Bureau will have to do in the future preference policy rounds beyond the 65 households is prescribe the income and the debt that households have. We will not be able to cast a wide net that says anyone interested in home ownership, come on and apply. We will have to say you must be mortgage ready and meet these criteria. So the Housing Bureau feels really strongly that that is not the approach. And so one of the solutions to avoiding that is increasing the development subsidy in particular.
But I still want to know how many of these 42 households without, this is just 42 out of what was supposed to be 65. So of the 42 that are currently in process, when we increase the subsidy from 80 to 100 and 125, how many people on this list right now, without that increase, cannot buy a home? And with the increase, they can. That's what I want to know.
I can't actually see those numbers from here, but
you are
I think
right that it's about 3 to 6, no more than 6.
This is, so I think that where you're looking on this graph, the blue, the green, those lines are really stark when it comes to down payment assistance and less clear when it comes to development. And so, all of the households with the subsidy increases will get into home ownership.
And how many will if we don't increase the subsidy? That's my question. Like, what is the impact on these potential homeowners right now?
Pretty much all of these people on this end.
Cannot afford. Okay, so say that again.
So if we don't increase the subsidy to the 100 or 125,000 for the development piece, then all of these folks on the lower end, 29 people approximately, would not be able to afford to buy a house. That's pretty, am I reading this correctly?
That's correct.
Okay.
That doesn't
What's
sound
more?
correct.
I think it's more than that, but that's the minimum.
So the difference of the subsidy increase is not really $20,000. It's like 16. And this subsidy increase is not a matter of 29 people. It is not. And I'm sorry, I can't just spill that out right now, but I do know that the difference in increasing the subsidy is not that significant. It really isn't. And so I think if we look at this graph, if that number was 61 instead of 77, that drops it down very, very small, and it's not 29. And I'm so sorry I cannot spit that out right now, but I feel like this is one of the charts we did, and it was not a difference of 29 people.
So Dana, I'm going to ask a question then, because that was my understanding, and since I work there and I don't understand, then, then they have to be confused because I'm confused.
Right.
So if we don't increase the subsidy for development for the houses that are being built, for folks that are at below 50% AMI, who are making, let's go back to the other chart, that are making $40,000 a year.
Right.
And we leave it at 80, those people can buy a house.
So if you take.
No, just answer that question. Can those people buy a house right now?
So the people, no.
Okay, so if we increase, let me finish. So if we increase the subsidy to $125,000 for development, would somebody making $40,000 be able to buy a house?
40,000.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So then, in essence, let me just finish. So in essence, everybody at that $40,000 mark,
It's not just income, so that's very hard for me to say a yes or no to this, so that's why I'm struggling.
I understand that, but just basically
Yes.
based on income, because that's basically what we have to go on. Based on income, somebody making $40,000, would they be able to buy a house with only $60,000 down payment
Most
in the
likely.
interstate URA?
Most likely, no.
Okay. Would somebody at $50,000 be able to buy a house with $60,000 down payment?
So I really believe that the partners should chime in and say yes or no. I don't feel comfortable enough saying it that way. I really want to try to explain something real quick because those are harder answers for me to answer, and I think that they would be able to answer that better, especially when it comes to development, because like she said, this is more of a down payment assistance loan chart in a way, but if this helps at all, and maybe it doesn't, but if we are looking at the 12, 7, and I think that's 8 and then 7, I think, okay, so all of those people that are under the 290, under that first line, right, you can see right off the bat that the increase does not put them in a position to buy a home. So you can't even say that the increase helped 12 plus 7 plus, sorry, you just told me
29.
what that number is. 20, you can't even say that the increase helped those people. They did not. And so that's what I mean by it's not just 20, our increase in subsidy helped 29 people. The increase, the decrease, the nothing, actually, what we have or what we are increasing it to does not help those people buy right now.
It doesn't
It's not
help them.
enough, excuse me. It's
Hold on, one second. I want to implement this. We've done it before. We're going to implement it again. When you're ready to talk, turn your tent up, and I will call on you. So hold your voice until. I'd appreciate it, so we're not all talking at the same time. Keeps us orderly. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Jillian, go ahead.
So how, and maybe one of the partners wants to answer this question. Of these 42, hopefully will eventually be 65 again, how many are expected to use down payment assistance, and how many are expected to buy properties being developed by the partners?
So one partner alone probably couldn't answer that because it is a combined list. So there is, I believe, 19 that PCRI are serving somewhere, and then whatever 42 minus 19 is for and I have a detailed list. Well, PCRI is kind of obviously that's new development. That's what they've proposed. And for I have a breakdown of how many for each type of down payment assistance provided from them. So one organization alone wouldn't be able to give you a synopsis for 42 because they're working with different numbers.
Can we rough percentage? Like half of the people are we expecting to use down payment assistance?
I would venture, based on my knowledge of the development projects, that 43 households of the 65 will likely end up in new development units because that's what's being built. And they're being built for the lower, higher debt and lower income households.
Right, so those are the bottom end of the graph,
Right.
for lack of a better term here. Those are the people that are going to be most helped by the increase to 125 in the development subsidy.
Yes.
Which is not just an increase of 20,000, but now we're talking about an increase of 45,000 from what was previously estimated. Is that all correct?
That's correct.
And then in order to serve the 65 families, PHB is proposing to take money out of the 7 million of approved TIF lift in the 2016 money, to take money out of that pot to kind of put into this one. Is that correct?
That's the whole 5-year allocation. So TIF lift is allocated over 5 years. So, yeah.
Okay, so are we getting more than $5 million for these 65 people or not?
So this chart right here, this 20 million, is all of the home ownership resources, all the interstate TIF home ownership dollars allocated over a 5-year period from 16-17 out 5 years.
Right. So how are we going to continue to serve the 65 people on this preference policy?
So
We're going to serve fewer people on the next round? Is that
So
correct?
yes, that is correct. So the line that's, a couple of rows down is the demarcation between the $5 million and the 65 households, and the TIF, the $7 million in TIF lift that council awarded, that there was never an outcome projection associated with it. So because we said 65 households, we want to keep saying 65 households.
I think that's the right thing to do, by the way.
So do I. But then for the $7 million, which we have not said, this is the methodology, these are the number of households served, we're proposing to take those resources, increase the subsidy to get the 65 into homeownership. For the remaining resources that are no longer 7, right, they're whatever it's decreased by to get the 65 into homeownership, we are proposing not to prescribe the income, the mortgage readiness, the debt levels for those households, but to run a very similar process to the one that we ran the first time around. It's allowing people who are prioritized through the preference policy to get into homeownership.
Okay, and then, I'm sorry, just really quickly, the second part of the proposal was to open up the purchase area to include the Lents URA for people in the interstate URA? Is that, no? Okay, then I misunderstood that. Thanks.
Sheila? Okay, you can put your name down. Thank you very much. Any other questions from the Oversight Committee directly? Thank you. Go ahead.
What is the source of funding for the subsidies? Where is it coming from? Property tax, state grant, federal grant? I'm asking to see if this is a sustainable model.
It's not a sustainable model.
Okay.
And so tax increment financing is complicated, to say the least. It has an end date. The interstate URA has a sunset date. It's, 5 to 8 years out. It could be extended. But, yeah.
So, committee members, would it be beneficial for anyone sitting here tonight to hear from any of the partners potentially that are in the room? They weren't slated to be on the agenda, but possibly to say, this is how a subsidy increase helps us. Would that be beneficial to hear?
Yeah. Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes, but with one addendum, how fast are they going to be able to do it if it's going to help them?
Yes, we need to have an idea of timeline. So, thank you very much. I'm sure you'll be back before we are done. It's very important. That's why we need to take the time to do this. I want to thank you guys again. I did it personally, but I want to thank you again for taking some time and putting another meeting in out of our normal schedule. So, why don't we have all the partners just come and join us right here at the table. I'll let you identify yourself. And then the question is 2 simple things. One is, how does a subsidy increase help you? And then timeline, how quickly can you benefit from the dollars? Because we don't want to be in a situation where what we are doing is increasing an amount and then we come back and that amount wasn't enough. So.
It's Steve Messinetti. I'm the CEO of Habitat for Humanity, Portland Metro East, part of the Collaborative. And I think the most significant thing this does is that this will allow us to serve the families that this program was meant to serve, who are the highest qualified families that are being selected through the preference policy, who happen to be on the lower end of the income spectrum. And while we are committed as partners to fill in that gap, but you're correct, this still isn't easy. There's still a gap there. By this increase across the board, it makes it more realistic for us to fill that gap with all the other subsidies we have. Some of them are more flexible, where we're able to move the subsidies to the lower income folks and not at the higher income. But it allows us to serve those lower income families that we wouldn't serve otherwise. Without these funds, we would have to start dropping some of those folks at the lower end and add people up at the higher end, which unfortunately would, I think, have less of an impact towards the ultimate goal of what we're trying to accomplish.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Diane Lynn. I'm Executive Director of Proud Ground, and thanks so much for giving us a minute to explain just how important it is that this program go back to the roots of what it was about, which is people were displaced, families were displaced, and they were traumatized. And when we had our task force group that many of us served on together, we made it very clear that the goal was to serve the most impacted families, right? The way to do that is to increase this subsidy and unleash us to get these resources plugged into both the units of housing that we've already sold 3 homes. Yay. And we still have a single family home out there. This will help us move that one. And then, we're going to get creative and working with our other, maybe even private partners on townhomes and those kinds of things. This is a bridge too far to ask someone who makes this amount of money to be able to afford a unit that just happens to cost this amount of money to either build or buy in the market. That's the gap we're trying to fill. And again, as Steve said, we are deeply committed with the new development projects that we're working on to bring lots of other resources to the table. We've been very active, very aggressive advocates at the state level for the LIFT program, where we're actually a part of working on that framework so we can match what you're doing here with other state funds to make these projects really possible. They just simply aren't feasible without the level of subsidy you're talking about tonight, especially for those who are the most impacted and most traumatized.
And hi, I'm Travis from PCRI. I think both Steve and Diane, I think really hit on a lot of the very important parts there, and I think especially so being that this program is really set up to provide the benefit for the families and the households that have been most negatively impacted by public investment in North and Northeast Portland, the historic African American community of our city and our state. And to that end, this resource is critically important for us to be able to serve the households that have come through the preference policy and that we're working very diligently with to improve their credit, help them understand the home buying process, and make sure that they're prepared for all the responsibilities and the benefits of home ownership. To get to your question about how quickly we can, the timeline, I think many of the families that PCRI is working with, that my colleagues are working with, still have a little bit of time to become ready for home ownership. They still have some challenges to work through. Some of them are closer than others, but this resource is something that we can immediately reflect in our financial pro forma. We've gone through a very intentional process with the Association of Minority Contractors and Metropolitan Contractor Improvement Partnership to identify contractors in the community who can provide the economic benefit right back to the community so that we can get more income to more folks, so that we can get more folks into more homes. And we have the properties to develop, and we've got the construction numbers and contracts nailed down so that we can make this happen for the homeowners who are in the program, so that we can make this additional subsidy work for the people that we're serving.
Absolutely.
Getting back to Felicia's point, I see you all as kind of the bridge. So you deal with individuals up front, and you try and explain these processes to them. For the individuals that you have helped, how are you explaining a silent second to them, and what has their response been? Because like what Dr. Bethel was saying, the whole bait and switch type of thing is something real, and that's what's caused a lot of distrust in the community now. And to avoid that, with the intent of helping those who have been the most impacted, what would you say? What's your suggestion?
Well, to answer your question, I'm Andrea Devner with PCRI. It's really, I think people are so incredibly desperate for an opportunity to own a home that quite honestly, I mean, we go through the process, we explain to them exactly what it is that they're signing up for. It is not our business just to have people sign up for anything they do not completely and thoroughly understand. And I think people are saying, hey, I've got to weigh this, right? I need these dollars in order to buy a home. And buying a home and owning a home is so important. I will do what I need to do it. So today, people are nodding their heads, they understand it, and they're just ready to move forward. So it's one of those things that's really difficult. People are not necessarily thinking about 30 years from now. They're thinking about, hey, I've got a notice from my landlord that my rent is going up $300, $400, $500, I've got to do something different. If this is what you have to offer me, I'm willing to take it. So I think, but I'm grateful for the conversation, and I think it's a conversation we need to continue to have about what does this mean moving forward. But for the most part, people aren't saying, no, I don't want it, if that's what it means. They're saying, I will take that in order to, in order to make homeownership possible for myself. So.
Thank you very much. And I do want to hear about that. I still want to hear, though, timeline.
Okay.
So we still want to have that answered, I think, to the satisfaction. So thank you, Andrea. And I'm not saying, I'm not dismissing.
Let me explain quickly. Sure.
I just want to add one other thing real quick to what Andrea said, and I want to note that while yes, this resource is important to get folks into home ownership, there's something about that balloon payment in 30 years that is exactly what was the creation of PCRI 25 years ago and Portland Housing Center 25 years ago, when black families in Northeast Portland were getting fraudulent land sale contracts with unsustainable balloon payments at the end. And there are a lot of people that distrust that because they've seen their family go through it before. So while it may be the only option, I think there's a really important cultural note to put to cultural and historic note to put to that is right here in this neighborhood that we're sitting in, that these families have gone through the situation before, and it's important to think about what that might look like for the families that are going through it now.
And I appreciate that, but again, I want to table that discussion.
Fair enough.
For another time. There's something we want, and I'm sure everyone has something to say about it, but please, I want to table that discussion for another time. That's a policy issue. It's an issue we fully intend on engaging in. I'll say it again. We fully intend on engaging in, but that's not our discussion tonight. Our discussion tonight is to resolve this subsidy issue. I want to land this plane. And so the question that we need to resolve is around timeline. So I understand it benefits us. How soon can we anticipate? I know that there's a process for people to go through, but while they're going through that, can we start building homes? Can we begin that process? So.
And the answer to that question, even though I'll put aside a very important critical point about the loan issue for a second, we need to be unleashed. We need decisions, and thank you all for participating in this process. We've been hung up, and we need to be able to move forward. We've got, for the condo project that you'll hear about next month, we have a builder, architect. Gina Woolley is here, worked in the community for over 40 years, is our owner's rep. She's in the room with us tonight. We've got HDC ready to jump into the project. We're going to be proving, we hope, that condos are the way to really build efficiently and effectively and serve these families and create an intentional community. And really, I think they'll be built just as quickly as we can literally put the projects together once these decisions are made. So it kind of jumps back to your end is as soon as you can do it, we're going to start the whole process and start breaking ground as early as next summer and get these units in the pipeline. While I have your attention one more second, let me please add that there's two kinds of subsidy. One is recapture, which you've been talking about in terms of the loan. The other is retention. In the case of all the Proud Ground and Habitat homes, and you can speak to this, Steve, these are not loans. They are essentially grants. They stay in the units of housing so that they will always stay permanently affordable in the community. Families will never be displaced again, or these units will never be lost to the market into the future, because our project keeps the resources in these units, and they'll never be repaid in the case of our models.
Very significant discussion. Thank you. Did you want to say anything?
No, that says it.
Dr. Bethel, is that satisfactory in terms of the question you had?
They don't want to hear my answer. No. Because you're still dreaming.
Can you push your,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and then Sheila, if you would turn this on.
In a way, you're still dreaming. You say you're ready to jump into the project, but that's not the next year. While we have people right now who are trying to get into housing, we've ran into the issue already where we were not able to deliver the houses and we had to extend the timeline so that we didn't lose the money. Now we're into a whole nother year again before you will start building, and then when you build, that's going to take 6-8 months. So we're looking at almost 2 years out before we can say we're going to put a person in, and the pricing is going to rise. You talk about condos, and we have to have a little bit more conversation about that. In condos, you got condo fees, and in a way, for some people, it's not really home ownership. It's almost like I just got a good place inside of an apartment complex, and that apartment complex is what's going to be, you know, confined and guiding me for the rest of this time that I'm paying this 30-year note. You have to be in a frame of mind to say, a condo is what I want to call home for me, even though for some you might say it is more feasible, more economical to build that way. But that's from this side of the table. But look on the side of the table from where those who were displaced came from. They came from single-family homes with yards where they could play. Their children had a place to have space where they were safe. They were not confined inside of a fence with concrete and asphalt and, you know, industrial-type swings and stuff like that. They could swing from the tree on a tire with a rope. We're trying to create family. We're trying to create community, and not so much the rise of just stacking people up again. That was not what this community was. I know we do have to take advantage of some of the space, you know, in order to accommodate more, but I want to encourage you that sooner than later to put the shovels in the ground and start pouring the concrete and getting people in houses and taking care of the problem before it continues. Well, it's continuing to arise. But before, again, there is another jump in terms of pricing. Pricing is just still getting to the point where people aren't going to be able to reach them. And I think some who are going to be on the top end of the chart is going to begin to find it difficult as housing prices start creeping closer to the $4.5 million mark.
Thank you for that question. It's critically important that we understand there's literally almost no inventory in the community right now at the price points that we need to fill the gap that we're talking about now. We purchased 4 homes over a year ago for exactly that reason, to get ahead of the market and hold those homes, and now we've successfully sold 3 of them. So the City of Portland released a winter NOFA for 2017 back in February. It was the decision of the Bureau to go in the direction of building condos to begin to bring family size, this is very important, family size units into the community. And we're talking 2 and 3 bedrooms, and that's a premium, it costs more money. But I think that was a decision made by the Bureau, and we are prepared to jump in. New construction just simply takes time, but our performers do anticipate the costs as best we can, and we really do anticipate that it's just now it's a matter of the sooner we get started, the sooner we're going to be able to celebrate families getting into these units. But they are family-sized, and they are they're, you know, there's no real other way to get families into units in the community without even higher levels of subsidy. Serve as many people as possible, as efficiently as we can, as quickly as we can, if we can get decisions made, and so we can jump forward.
I think can I make
Yes, and then Sheila after you.
one other note about the timeline, and I know this is true for PCRI. I assume this is also true for the other homeownership partners. So I think we're I believe ready to move into actually getting our shovels in the ground and building this year on our first homes. But I think it's also important to note that for the homes that we're developing, the timeline of getting the homes completed is going to align pretty closely with the readiness of the buyers. At this point in time, the buyers and the clients that we're serving, the families that we're serving that have come through the preference policy are, for the most part, not ready to move into a home today. And so having our construction timeline align with the readiness of the buyers, which, you know, to the greatest degree that we can predict that and make sure that that lines up, we're working on that, and we are working on getting into construction as soon as possible so that that does in fact line up and those homes are ready as soon as they can be.
I guess my biggest concern is that we talk about a timeline, we talk about 18 months ago or so, at least last year, where everybody came in and with the advice of our partners out there, we're told this is what we need and this is how we can make it happen. And then since June, when I came onto this board, we've been hearing, well, we can't do it that way. We need more money to do it. In the interim, I'm hearing a lot of concerns about the mechanism for the whole process, and will it really benefit the folks that we're all trying to benefit here? The piece that I thought would be the easiest because of the desire and the involvement and expertise that's out there in the community was the part of getting people ready and having them know what they needed to do so that they'd be there when the house is built. So I am a little concerned that I'm still hearing even now that even with the subsidies, it's going to be hard to find folks who are ready to buy when the properties are ready. And so I just want to make sure, is that what I'm hearing you say?
I don't think so. I think what Travis was saying was, we have the families. We know their situations. In many cases, it's a year out before they're going to be ready to buy the house. In some cases, we only got those families in the recent months, so the families didn't all come to us at the beginning. And that now, for that new construction, the timing is actually ripe for that home to be built over the next year. So the families are here already.
So there will be, and I'm asking this question again because in a meeting back in the summer, I was hearing folks with the long list of folks who were potentials from to be able to purchase. There was a lot of checks where they had been eliminated or for whatever reasons or just weren't ready. And so that is a concern for me, is that if we say yes this time around, because we're doing this, we did the original based on what partners recommended. We come back and do this based on what partners recommended. I'm concerned that there might be, what is the word, equivocations around why it's not going to work next time around. And so when I'm talking about a timeline, I'm not just talking about a timeline for you to get the money to go out and do a project. I'm also talking about the people that we want to have in those properties being ready and able to participate. And with that, reason I'm saying that is because I heard someone from the Housing Bureau saying that, you know, this year was the year that we were looking to have the gates open and get those people who are at the lower end and would be able to come in, but maybe the way we use the money in the future is there'd be some prescribed qualifications that would eliminate some of the people, if not all the people that we were hoping would come in through this effort.
Sheila, the one thing I would add, and then I'll hand it over to our colleague here, is we've been working very hard with these. We've got a team of counselors in the AW Collaborative and at PCRI working very hard with these families. And there are some things that just literally take time because the lenders require employment history, and the time it takes to just improve a credit score is very real. But I think, as Travis said, you have a convergence of the building of all these units and people being ready, a real possibility here. We're trying everything we can. And thanks to Habitat, we're actually able to get to the lower income families more effectively too. So we're bringing quite a lot of effort, additional resources, and a tremendous amount of grit to continue to move this process forward. To be perfectly candid, the timing has been hung up over some of these processes and conversations within the Bureau. And like I said, we're ready to jump and go. If we have longer conversations that take months into the future, it'll simply take longer to get the process moving. Would you add something?
I'm Linda from PCRI, the homeownership coordinator there. So we have people that are ready, but they're not from the preference policy. So, we have a pipeline of folks we were already working with for our homeownership program, and I think that's the same for most of us here. The folks that came in, it's like a net was cast out, you pulled in all these fish, and the few that was left on the bottom are the ones we're working with. And I mean, that's the best way I can put it, because they have so many challenges and barriers. The ones that are holding on to this hope of getting a house, they're the ones who have filed bankruptcy, have, you got to get that off your credit. A certain amount of time has to go before a mortgager is going to finance them. The folks who have bounced around in temporary jobs, we're trying to get them stable for 2 years of employment. It's just so many barriers that take longer than the amount of time that they're allowed. So that's why for us to build these homes, we can put people in them. It's just the folks, like you said, that we want to benefit. They may not be the ones that be first to benefit from them. So.
Jillian, yes.
I've been following the rules the whole time. So I have a couple questions. What I'm understanding you say is that without the subsidy increase, none of it can get built? So how many more units, how many more homeowners are we creating when we increase the subsidy?
None. What we're doing is serving the higher priority families. If we don't increase the subsidy, we move half of this group off and we go select higher income families who are lower on the list.
I understand. And if I understand from our previous meetings, the reason that this number is different today than it was at the beginning of the preference policy is because the mix of people, the mix of income levels was not anticipated to have as many people that were at a lower income level. Is that correct?
Combined with the prices going up.
So we can assume that the next group of people coming in on the preference policy list, because this is only, 42, 43? 42? So we've got another 23 potential homeowners that are not currently in process. And if they all are taking, like I said, if the trends that we have right now continue to be true, how many people are going to be in homes by the end of by December 2018, which is the original deadline of the TIF funds? Obviously 3.
Four.
Yeah.
Four, for sure. And then
Four for
we're
sure.
hoping that we could match these resources with private developers who are in the process of building units out there right now. It's simply not feasible with any less than this amount of money. That's just the reality. And remember, this was presented by the city to us, and we did our best to respond originally, putting together as many resources as we could at the time. I think it's been very clear tonight that, again, the amount of time, the income levels people are at, and the rising costs, it does make the timing issue even more imperative. We've just got to move forward, or we're really going to lose people off of this, and we're going to lose the partners we brought to the table to help us do this.
So you're not anticipating any more down payment assistance, people buying on the market? There won't be any units completed by the end of 2018?
No, I think there will be, and knowing what we have will be really helpful. One of the challenges we have is, and we are trying to work with each family to accomplish their goals. In some cases, we do have that family at a low income who's really set at finding that single family house, and we're working with them to either find that or to come to that realization that that's not going to be possible, and then shift them over to something else. Or maybe it will be, and we'll find that perfect home that they want that works with these numbers. So we have folks that we're working on that they might buy that home on the market, and in some cases we might buy it for them and then sell it to them when it's ready. So we're trying to be flexible in that regard. Or they might buy that new construction condo. So it really, we're trying to meet their needs and work with them individually. So it's hard to say. We might have a family that's ready, but they want that unit that's not going to be ready for a year, and we're not going to force that either.
Okay. So regardless of the increase in subsidy, at some point, we're going to need to talk about extending the timeline as well, right? I mean, these things are going to have to go together.
It's going to be important that we have units in the queue, in the pipeline, I think, to show City Council that we've made substantial progress. I think that's going to be very important. So together with what we've already done, what we hope we can do just going forward, and the units that we have in the pipeline, it's just a matter of time. Because the whole process, as you all know, has taken quite a lot more time than originally anticipated.
So the people we have the 42 people that are currently being served, and then we've got 23 more people to put into the pipeline, for lack of a better term. And what is the projection for what is the timeline projection for actually having 65 homeowners? I'm not looking for a promise. I just want like a rough count, because right now it feels like it's 2020, 2019, 2018, like just, some sort of ballpark as to where this is going to land.
So before you answer that, Steve, I just want to clarify that some of the units are not out of the $5 million. So Diane's units at 5020 came through the NOFA, and some of Steve's units that he's been talking about came through the NOFA. So those are not set on the 2018 timeline.
Gotcha.
It would be anything that we're paying for out of the original $5 million. So those two NOFA projects are not on that timeline. So it would be PCRI's homes. I guess you guys are doing some project out of there's some condos, but there are a couple different things working here that are not just that initial $5 million.
Okay.
They're not counted in the 49 that we're looking at, or in the 42.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct.
So we'll be serving more families after that. That's exactly right.
But I mean,
We'll be serving more.
tonight we're talking about this $5 million and these 65 slots, and I want to know when there's going to be, out of this pool, using the preference policy, when are we going to have 65 homeowners? Estimate.
Yeah. I would say
Year,
it's
2
a
years,
year.
5 years?
I'd say it's a year extended. So
like
December of
beyond.
2019.
2019.
We haven't discussed
All
that
right.
as a team, but that's mine.
Okay.
Thank you.
2 years.
All right, thank you, partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
you all very
time.
much.
We appreciate it. Needed the questions to be asked. So, just to clarify a couple of things, tonight's discussion is specifically to address the subsidy issue. I think we've identified two other issues that need further discussion and thought and consideration that are beyond the scope of our discussion tonight. What we do want to do tonight is make sure that each of us weigh in on our perspective on whether or not the subsidy is increased. That is a decision recommendation that we will resolve this evening. Prior to doing that, I don't have any cards or anyone that signed up for public testimony. I didn't receive any cards. Were there any public testimony? I take it as no. Wonderful, excellent. So then, I'm going to go through each committee member. We are absolutely about to vote for your position on whether or not the subsidy should be increased. And I will begin with Jillian. You can make your comment and then your vote.
I guess I very much feel backed into a corner on this vote because I feel like what we're hearing from the partners and from the Bureau is that without the increase, we are not going to be serving these home buyers, and that's ultimately my priority. So I really appreciate that the Bureau has recognized that it's important to keep this homeownership pool not just at 65, which was the original promise to the community. And so, because originally when this was brought to us, we were talking about reducing the number of people served to 50. So I appreciate that. Like Sheila was saying earlier, I want this to be enough. I hope that these numbers are very well calculated and that in another 6, 9, 12 months, we're not having this vote again for another increase. So trusting that that the Bureau and the partners have calculated everything correctly and this is going to be sufficient subsidy, then my vote is yes.
Thank you very much.
I'm actually going to abstain from voting, but just my response to the group. For the intent of the preference policy and helping those who have been affected disproportionately, I would approve. This is something that I would back, but I'm going to abstain from voting.
Thank you very much. Dr. Edwards.
I totally get it, and I know that there's a need, and I want people to have access to home ownership like everybody else in this room. I feel, though, that this is a stopgap and not a solution. And I would hope that we are working on a solution that's bigger than this and more detailed and also addresses some of the issues that other people have raised about loan forgiveness and just respecting the community and the culture that's here. In the meantime, though, I do want people to have access to a home, so I will vote yes, hoping that this is not the last that we will see of this, that there will be work on a true solution and a policy that addresses it more comprehensively.
Thank you, Doctor. Tristan.
Thank you. I will say that my initial reservations about it and feeling that we need to have a holistic approach is still there. I like how Jillian put it, is trusting that the calculations have been made, and then with the presumption, obviously, that we're going to come back and talk about the back-end policy issues. I think this is something that can be positive, and I think it's something that, with everything and all the extra discussion that definitely need to be had, that we can work to make sure that it isn't just, as she put, a stopgap. It isn't just, a bait and switch, as it was put earlier, and getting people into homes and then they have the same problems that we've systematically had previously. So with that being said, my vote is yes.
Thank you, sir. Sheila.
I'll be quick. Hoping that we have enlightened partnership, public-private and community, because there has been discussion back and forth for quite a while on this. I have reservations about making sure folks get served, the people that we identified these funds for. But I'm going to vote yes to support the increase, with the caveat that I do want to see more conversation, discussion around the how.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bethel.
The old saying says the proof is going to be in the pudding. That means when it all comes together, you'll know if it really works or if it does not work. In terms of the subsidy, so that people will be able to have housing That's very, very good. My concern, and again, I express that, is the silent loan part, how it's going to be repaid and how it's going to impact the families on the back end. And so I do want to encourage the city as well as the developers, providers, to begin to work on ways in which they can be creative and help those particular families once they get in to understand fully. And number two, begin to plan as to how they can take care of this and work on it prior to getting to their 30-year ending and then being faced with the balloon payment. With that said, and that everything is together according to what the developers are saying to us at this point, I will vote yes to support the increase of the subsidy. But just again remind you, as my old saying goes, the proof is going to be in the pudding. We'll see how fast you can develop and get families in, and that will prove to me that what you have planned and said is going to be workable, and we will see at that time.
Thank you, sir. Felicia Tripp.
I vote yes, because I never had issues with the subsidy part of it. As you guys know, it's a six-figure loan that's silent. But in this particular URA, it is extremely difficult, and the partners are trying to do their best. And if this additional subsidy helps people get into home ownership, then I want to support them on their part. But as a committee, we got to really work on the policy part.
Thank you. Marlon.
I just have two quick questions. Hopefully somebody can answer them. And that'll determine my vote. Do we know of the average cost of a home in the URA right now? Does anybody have an idea?
As identified on slide, I believe.
The average loan amount.
No, I just want to know the average cost
But
of a house.
the average sales, it's not the average, but in looking at the existing inventory, 290 would be what we might expect. No. It would be the minimum amount.
But he's not asking you that.
I don't have the average in URA. It's probably upwards of 450,000.
I believe it's $440,000 is the average sale price in North and Northeast Portland.
$440,000.
$440,000 is the average sale price.
And
yes.
what's the average sale price of construction of a new home?
In the same area? It would be about the same in the same area.
Then I vote no.
Virgie.
I'm really excited about helping those that are in this gap be able to become homeowners. I think it's really important to give someone the opportunity to get loan ready, to be able to participate in the process, and if it means we need to give an increase to the limit, I'm voting yes.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lisa Bates is not with us tonight, and I did not receive a vote or a weigh-in from her, so I need to acknowledge that. Before I give my position, I want to first of all say thanks to this Oversight Committee for the work that you do and the energy that you bring to this table, and the fact that you spend the time going over the information and making sure that you are adequately prepared to have an intelligent and insightful discussion. I appreciate your expertise and your specifics around involvement. I also want to say that I value highly your commitment to the issues that have impacted us and have brought us to this moment as we are all wrestling with this heavy lift of gentrification and displacement. As demonstrated by our conversation tonight, there are nuances and levels and dynamics that have to be explored and have to be addressed, and I appreciate your involvement to give your time to this work, as we all are giving our time to this work. So as it relates to the increase tonight, I would also say that we have to address and discuss the silent loan on those portions or that aspect of this funding that will impact the families that would have that 30-year balloon, because those who are in permanent affordability will not have to deal with that issue. So it's something that we have to address and think through, because we're committed to generational wealth and generational opportunity. In light of the expenses and the costs associated with housing and housing opportunity, my position is yes, that we increase the subsidy. So I believe we have the vote of 8 yeses, 1 no, and then 1 in absentia. So in that regard, then the subsidy is going to carry. There will be an increase of subsidy. I think you can clap. I think you can clap.
Well, it still has to go to the mayor.
The recommendation is from us that there will be an increase of subsidy. Yes. And then, of course, it will go to the mayor for the final weigh-in. I appreciate your time tonight. We will be back together in a month from now, and to gather and continue our discussion around the work that's in front of us. So thank you very much, everyone. Have yourself a wonderful evening.